an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The executive director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to a Christmas week edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Monday. It's the 19th day of December, and as we know, Christmas is 6 days away. So it's getting close, and it's hectic out there, and I think all of you know that. Welcome to a new week of programming here at the Virtual Center. I trust that the worst aspects of my nagging malady that has kept me off the air for a couple of weeks, it has at least been conquered to the point that I can make it through a program. We did a program on Wednesday, a little bit of coughing, but not too bad. And I wanted to do that because I didn't want to start the week today having been off for two and a half full weeks. So it's a pleasure to be. You don't know how excited I am to kind of be here with the prospects of being here for a few days in a row. I will say that because it is Christmas season, obviously, that's going to affect programming a little bit. My wife and I are leaving. I'm going to do some Christmas visiting, and we're going to be leaving for a while on Wednesday. So what that means is we will not be doing a live program on Wednesday. And I'll be returning on Monday, so probably not able to do one then either because we'll be in the car both times. But my guess is that we'll do a program today and tomorrow, and then we'll be back on the next Tuesday, and we'll just get into our regular routine from then on. Hopefully everything will work out. So I did want to say that right at the beginning because I didn't want to spring it on folks and people think that something is wrong or I've had a relapse or any of these things. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to the next to today and tomorrow to these programs. I had, in fact, I put this on Facebook over the weekend. It's not a new experience because I've been doing this for better than 20 years. But here in our local Rotary Club, we have a tradition. Up until this year, it's been 2 Saturdays, the 2 Saturdays before Christmas. But because of the personnel and we were having trouble filling all the slots, we reduced it this year to 1, and that was this past Saturday. We members of the Rotary Club go out and ring the bell for Salvation Army all over town on that one day, and so we cover the mall and we cover Walmart and where most of the traffic is. And we have all the doors covered and various other things. And so Saturday was our day. We caught a break in the weather because the temperature suddenly went up from way below freezing to the point that it was in the low 50s by the time we started Saturday afternoon. And my wife and I were at Walmart here, and we were there for 2 hours at the height of the afternoon, 2 to 4 in the afternoon. And I got to tell you, it's just one of the most delightful experiences one could have. Every year, I tell myself that maybe I shouldn't do this another year, but I can't not do it. It's just too much fun. If there's anything that will get you into the Christmas spirit, it's watching parents come with little children and having children fold dollar bills and tuck them into that red kettle. Let me tell you. It is absolutely a joy. Everybody's in such a good mood, and I had to put on Facebook when I returned home that evening, Saturday evening, that there's been a report done that West Virginia is considered among the most generous state. The people of West Virginia are considered among the most generous in the country. And, of course, the reason that's significant is because West Virginia is one of the poorest states in the country. Fact of the matter is those who have less give more. And I found that out on Saturday, and I put on Facebook, if anybody ever questions the generosity of West Virginians, let me tell you, it was amazing. Very, very few people walked by and didn't put something in that kettle. It was absolutely astounding. And people were putting 5s and 10s and, it was exhilarating. It was wonderful. Great experience. And I told my wife, I don't know if I could make it through Christmas without having experienced that. It was incredible. And anyway, I've been up ever since. It's just fabulous. My wife and I, she was on her way to work this morning, and before she left, we were talking over a cup of coffee, and I told her this is one of the best weekends I had, and mainly the reason was that kettle experience on Saturday afternoon. I just thought it was absolutely wonderful. So anyway, welcome to the Virtual Center. Welcome to the last week before Christmas. We would love to hear from you if you would like to join us or share some thoughts, concerns, ideas, or whatever. We would love to hear from you. Our phone number, Agnes is in the studio, and if you call, Agnes will pick up and you'll be on the line momentarily, and you can share your thoughts with our other listeners as well. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. 4676, of course, translates into Horn, H-O-R-N, which obviously is quite appropriate. If you would like to share your thoughts in an email and trust me to get them on the air for you, I would be more than happy to do that. My email address is waobrien906 @gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906 @gmail.com. Finally, let me again mention our Facebook page. I think I've been very active this weekend on Facebook. I've posted 5 or 6 items. And part of what I was doing was kind of setting up our programs this week, because I kept thinking this would be a good topic to address on the Virtual Center. This would be a topic that would be worth mentioning at the Virtual Center. So by the time I got through last evening, I had probably posted 5 or 6 different items over the last couple of days on our Facebook page. And they're the most recent ones there. And in fact, we'll be dealing with a few of them in our program today and tomorrow both. So I do invite you to visit our Facebook page. If you've never done it, just go to the homepage, facebook.com, and in the search box at the top, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution. And you'll be onto our Facebook page, and you will see the most recent postings come first, and then they gradually go back. So you'll have, probably 6 or 7 of the most recent postings on the Virtual Center Facebook page. So we invite you to share with us that way, and there is an opportunity on Facebook to comment, to share. I get emails, notes on Facebook all the time from people that share these postings with friends, with their friends. And so it's a good way to get out some of the information, some of the perspectives on some of the major issues of the day. I think that's the value of Facebook. I know that there are dangers associated with it. We've talked about them. We will continue to talk about them. In fact, I think that's one of the issues we'll be hitting on over the next, if not today, then tomorrow as well. So Facebook has incredible potential. It also poses a serious threat. We know about that. We know what happens with children, for example. How dangerous it is and how easy it is to put out information that you really don't want to put out. I mean, I did today when I came on the air. I mentioned that we wouldn't be doing a program Wednesday because I'd be leaving town. My house is going to be empty Wednesday. So if my wife heard that, she'd really be worried. And the fact that we have machine guns set up all around the property. No, I'm only kidding. But anyway, but that's what I mean. It's so easy to inadvertently provide information, throw information out there, and the wrong people get their hands on it. Some people spend their time doing nothing else but looking for information like that. So again, we're dealing with something that is that has very positive as well as negative implications. And so it seems to me that what the responsibility is on us to make sure we use it the right way, we take advantage the right way, and we do everything we can to minimize the possibility that it'll be used the wrong way. And let me make this point now, because I was going to make it later, but let me just make it now. It seems to me that one of the things that really makes this a problem is our education system. And I'm not going to go into that now because that's an issue in and of itself. But the fact of the matter is we are not educating our young people well enough to be able to handle the challenges that a medium like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or any of these other things poses. We are not preparing our people well enough to be able to see through efforts to manipulate the news, efforts to manipulate the minds, the general public, and all the rest of it. Say what you will about all of this stuff about the election, about whether the Russians influenced the election, whether they hacked the system, whether they did everything they could do to make sure that Trump won, all the things. We'll be talking about that today. But all of it. The fact of the matter is, all of it says the same thing. And that is, the vast majority of the voting public is not sophisticated enough to see through what we're trying to do. That's why there's so much money raised for advertising and attack ads. Because the public, they work. Negative campaigning works. The reason it works is because people are not sophisticated enough to be able to see through it, to recognize come-ons, to recognize disinformation, fake news, to recognize that half the story is there, but the half that doesn't quite fit that theme is left out. That requires sophisticated reading. It requires higher level cognitive skills, all the kinds of things that a quality education would encompass, all the kinds of things that too many influential people in this country are reluctant to introduce into our K through 12 education system. Reading is tough. Reading well is not that common. Jefferson knew, the founders knew, that general education up to a point was very, very necessary if you were going to govern a republic, because you had to be able to reach people. You had to be able to communicate with people. But the fact of the matter is, the thinking was that the vast majority of people didn't need a level of education above that. If the level that they get is minimal, it gives you the opportunity to influence them, but it doesn't give them the skills to recognize it, if that makes sense. That happens at the higher levels of education, and during the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, higher education was pretty much reserved for the well-to-do. And so that's been the issue. We've talked about it over and over and over again here at the Virtual Center. But that's really what we're dealing with now. I think that I've had a number of people on different issues that we've addressed here at the Virtual Center talk about the sometimes controversial nature of particular perspectives and things. Or, I've never heard of it that way. I never thought of it that way. I never thought about that subject that way. And the reason for that is because our education system doesn't encourage us to do that. And that's really the issue. And I think the answer lies there. The major problems we're having with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of this stuff, the solution to this is to educate the public well enough so that they know what they're reading and they don't fall for the obvious. And that's kind of where we are. And I think I think that's very important. So, I mean, that's an aside. I didn't intend to go there today. I did want to mention as a kind of a first item today, and I think many of you, if you've been watching the news, you know that today is the day that the Electoral College meets to cast ballots for President of the United States. And we talked about this the other day. In fact, in our last program on Wednesday, when Bob Kincaid joined us in the first hour, we had a fairly healthy discussion about the Electoral College and how it works and the mechanics of it and how complicated it is. It is very complicated. But the way the procedure works very quickly is that all over the country today, in state capitals all over the country, the appointed electors come together, get the ballot, and cast their ballot for president and vice president. In the states that Donald Trump carried, the electors will be Republican electors. In the states that Hillary Clinton carried, the electors will be Democratic electors. And so if everything goes according to Hoyle, in other words, if the members of the Electoral College vote according to the way the people of their states voted, then Donald Trump will indeed win, because I think he has a total of 309 electoral votes, when 270 is enough to put one over. So the fact of the matter is there's been a lot of attention over the last few days to efforts to encourage electors to not follow the will of the people, but rather to vote their conscience and to feel very comfortable in withholding support for Donald Trump, even if the people of your state voted for it. A number of states, more than 20, have passed laws requiring the electors to vote according to the will of the voters, but the other states have not. So that means that there's an effort to encourage electors to withhold their support for Donald Trump. In order for that to be effective, 37 electors out of 538 would have to do it. And the way the procedure works is they cast the ballots today, and then the ballots are sealed, submitted to various places. From what I understand, one copy of the ballots goes to the National Archives. Another one goes to the vice president, because the vice president is president of the Senate. And on the 6th of January, the vice president will take charge in the Senate, and they will open the ballots and count the votes. And on the 6th of January, all things being predictable, Donald Trump will be officially declared president of the United States, and then he'll be inaugurated 12 days later on January 20th. That's the way it works. So in order to deny Donald Trump the 270 electoral votes minimum he needs to be elected, that would mean that 37, the number that I'm hearing in the media today is 37. 37 electors would have to rebel, if you want to call it that. They're being referred to as faithless electors, and what that means is that they're not going along and following through and making their vote routine. And there's a big debate about it, and especially since Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by almost 3 million over Donald Trump, there's probably more justification and more legitimacy to the argument for the independence of the electors as there's ever been. But let's face it, the chances are very remote that anything is going to happen. But the reason I mention this today is because while the votes are being cast today, they're not going to be opened and counted until January. So we're not going to know anything today officially as to how they voted, except the ones who are more than willing to acknowledge that. Here in West Virginia, for example, the delegates, at least I think we have 5, and I can't remember 2 of them, but 3 of them are very, very prominent Republican leaders in this state. Bill Cole, who was a losing Republican candidate for governor, in November 8th election. Patrick Morrisey, who was reelected as Republican Attorney General in West Virginia. And I'm kind of stuck for the name now, but this third candidate was elected to a state office here in West Virginia as well. So, and they made it very clear that there's no way in the world that they're not going to vote for Donald Trump. And so, and I think that's probably what it's going to be pretty much around the country. Although I've noticed on Facebook there are petitions to sign and urging people to urging the electors to not to follow the will of the people and to withhold their support. And of course, the fact of the matter is, if Donald Trump were not to get the 270, it would go into the House of Representatives, which is controlled by Republicans. So I don't think for those who are holding out hope about the results of today, I don't expect that there'll be much payback from that. But it does really make for an interesting conversation. And the fact of the matter is, more people know more about the Electoral College than they ever knew before. That's a good thing. I was fortunate in that I had submitted an article that I wrote. I covered it here some weeks ago at the Virtual Center to the Gazette, and they chose to publish it yesterday in the Sunday edition, which was the very appropriate day because it was the day before the Electoral College votes. And in fact, it appeared in the Gazette alongside an article by Professor DeClerico, who's a visiting professor at West Virginia University, who was advocating the abolition of the Electoral College, and I was not. I don't think right now, with Twitter and Donald Trump's access to the general population, I don't think that we would be doing ourselves any good by eliminating some of the last checks the Constitution provides us for slowing down the ability of, in this case, Donald Trump, to gain immediate access to 15, 16 million voters instantaneously with Twitter. I think that poses a direct threat of direct democracy to our system, which I don't think the system is capable of handling. And so I think right now the last thing we need to be doing is eliminating other checks, because I think we need to take that very seriously. We've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go into it in any further depth. But today is the day, and that the Electoral College does the deed, so to speak. And I just wanted to remind people of that. I'm guessing that most people know it. But be that as it may, I think it's important. One of the subjects that I had intended to touch on in our last program last Wednesday, and because of time, we were into our last half hour. If you'll recall, if you were with us, I kind of made the decision that the best thing to do would be to hold it, because it's a little bit more involved. It's going to take a little bit more time than we had that day. And I didn't want to get a third of the way through the topic, or halfway through the topic, and then have a 5-day gap and then have to come back today and repeat the whole thing. It seemed to me it would be much easier just to hold it off until today. So that's one of the things that I would like to do. And it's very, very relevant. Many of the issues that are being out there, other than the Electoral College issue itself, it seems to me are revolving around this. And when I decided that this would be a worthy topic for the Virtual Center, the issue was Taiwan and China. The issue that really prompted me to make the effort to do something with this subject was Donald Trump's challenge to what is called the One China policy. And, I thought that this really raised questions about foreign policy that really deserve some attention. Since that time, an even more pertinent foreign policy issue has raised its head. Well, actually, more than one. Obviously, we have that ongoing disaster in Aleppo that's in the Syrian war, and really what amounts to genocide going on there. It's absolutely incredible. If you think about this, I've thought about this quite a bit. It seems to me that if the world was as we wish it was, if people really did have their priorities in order, if people took seriously the wisdom and the preachings of people like Pope Francis and some of the comments made by President Obama and other world leaders, if we really put the welfare of humanity ahead of everything else, then the fact of the matter is the world would stop until that situation in Syria was resolved. Because that situation is one that educated people, the vast majority of the developed world, made the decision at the end of World War II that we would never allow to happen again, ever. That we would have a concentrated, organized effort of a people to eliminate an entire people. And that's what we see happen. And we saw it happening in Serbia, if you remember, during the Clinton administration. And the world was able to pull together and late, but at least intervene. This situation that's going on now seems to be one that we haven't been able to get our arms around and a handle on at all. In his last press conference held Friday, President Obama really, I think, took quite a bit of blame for that, quite a bit of the responsibility for that. Of course, a lot of his enemies, his opponents, are doing more than assigning some responsibility for it to him. They're blaming it on him. The fact of the matter is that our inabilities to work with or get along with or find a way to work together with Russia in that particular situation has enabled the bloodshed and the slaughter to go on way beyond where educated, intelligent human beings ought to be in any way permitting this to go on. And what I kept thinking this weekend after watching the president's press conference on Friday, I kept thinking, that if the world was as we wished it would be, then the entire world would come together and say, we do nothing else anywhere until that is stopped. But, as you know, I did see this morning that they had some buses in there and they were removing a number of citizens from Aleppo. Of course, they're being taken to camps, to Syrian government camps. And so it's a little bit difficult to know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are and all of that. Because you've got ISIS involved in it. You've got you've got the U.S. and Soviet and Russia. I keep saying Soviet Union because that's what we grew up knowing. But the situation between Russia and the United States, all of it becomes very, very complicated. And so the fact of the matter is that issue is one that I think all of us need to always keep in mind, because I don't know, during this Christmas season, if indeed prayer works, then it seems to me the prayers of the world ought to be directed toward that particular situation first and foremost, before anything else. But the issue that I was really focusing on, the one that I really wanted to concentrate on as part of our program today, because it's getting so much attention, is the alleged Russian hacking of the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton's emails and Podesta's emails and all the rest of it. And of course, the debate revolves around the hacking itself. And then the second issue, it seems to me, is whether in fact Russian intent for the hacking was to do everything that it could do in order to ensure a Trump victory. And what we've seen is that that particular issue seems to be driving much of the news surrounding the Trump transition efforts before the inauguration on the 20th of January, which is, of course, a month from tomorrow. The Trump administration is holding firm on its clear strategy, which is to deny that there's any evidence that the Russians hacked. That there was hacking, we know, because WikiLeaks released the emails, released the information. So we know there was hacking done. But as Donald Trump said, we don't know who did it for sure. Could be the Russians, could be the Chinese, and as Donald Trump said, could be some 400-pound slob in New Jersey sitting on his bed doing it. The fact that the Trump people have stuck together on this, I think is very significant, because what it tells us is that they have adopted a strategy. And no matter who speaks, whether it's Donald Trump on Twitter or whether it's Kellyanne Conway, who is the one that the Trump administration, the Trump team puts out there to go on the Sunday talk shows and the rest of it. She's been on all of them. She's basically saying the same thing that Donald Trump is saying in the tweets. And that is denying the credibility and the validity of Russian intent to help Donald Trump in the election. In fact, as we know, the CIA, it seems like every couple of days, comes up with something stronger in its surety, in its absolute certainty that the Russians were responsible for the hacking. And then last week, the CIA came out, Clapper and others came out and announced that they were pretty much convinced that the intent of the hacking was to help Donald Trump and to defeat Hillary Clinton. And then over this past weekend, Hillary Clinton entered the fray. She's, of course, been quiet since the election for the most part. But she came out and made a statement that, in her view, the Comey letter, which reopened the email situation, her email question, 11 days before the election, plus Russian hacking to benefit Donald Trump, cost her the election. And she also said, most recently, that she's convinced of the Russian hacking situation because she believes that Putin has it in for her, has it in for the Clintons, for reasons that go all the way back into Bill Clinton's administrations in the 1990s. We'll get into that. And so what we have is an impasse, a political impasse. We have prominent Republicans, leaders, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, urging the creation of a bipartisan investigation committee to dig into this and get the information. Because the fact of the matter is, this whole issue of hacking in an election really compromises the integrity of our election system. It's important. And it's so important that we can't ignore it. We've got to do something about it. And so far, the Trump team has refused to accept the legitimacy of that proposal. Democrats, are jumping on the bandwagon. The media, for the most part, believes that we need to do this. So right now, the holdout is the Trump campaign. And clearly their strategy is to plant their feet firmly, dig in their heels, so to speak, and refuse to acknowledge that any hacking, especially to benefit Donald Trump, occurred by the Russians at all. Fact of the matter is, I think we have to consider why that strategy would seem to be the preferred one for the Trump team. It seems to me that it's probably politically shrewd. Because for the Trump team to admit even the possibility that Russian hacking was aimed at helping Donald Trump win the election, the mere admission of the willingness to admit that jeopardizes, from Trump's perspective, the validity of his victory. It basically is a step toward conceding that the only reason he won is because there were things going on that shouldn't have been going on. For Donald Trump and his team, much better to make the case than the reason I won is because the American people wanted me to win. To the point that Donald Trump even said, if it hadn't been for the millions of illegal alien votes in California for Hillary Clinton, I'd have won the popular vote too. There's no justification, no evidence that that happened. But in this world of post-truth, as it were, hard evidence, data, is being questioned as being a positive. Donald Trump has pretty much made it a fashionable point from his perspective of claiming that there are those who accept hard data and evidence and make the decisions that way, but he chooses not to. That, in other words, operating by instinct, going by gut, going by what you feel, he believes is as valid a decision-making, as valid a basis for decision-making as hard evidence and research. There's a lot of literature coming out on this because this raises serious questions, and I think we've touched on this before, because it calls into question the entire Western world's tradition, culture, and tradition that stems from the Enlightenment, from the scientific revolution, about the nature of evidence and about the whole idea of hypotheses, educated guesses, and then doing the research in order to validate a particular hypothesis or invalidate others. That's the way the Western world decided a long time ago that the pursuit of truth needed to work. What Donald Trump is proposing is a challenge to that. Then, in other words, my point of view, my opinion is as valid as yours. If you choose to back yours up with evidence, and I choose to rely instead on what I know to be true, my instinct, my gut, then my opinion is as valid as yours. And more people are accepting that. The fact of the matter is, of course, we know that that's not true. Yes, it is a free country. Yes, people have a right to their opinions. But that doesn't mean that everybody's opinion is as valuable as everybody else's opinion. The history of the world has told us that that's not true. But through social media, the mantra questioning some of these accepted beliefs has taken hold. And it seems to me that as we look at the beginnings of a new year here at the Virtual Center, we're going to be spending more and more time on these kinds of philosophical issues because they have real practical impact on what happens in the world or what doesn't happen in the world. It seems to me it is going to be critical that we are able to marshal the evidence and the authority necessary to stifle this particular approach. We've seen it with the climate deniers, the climate change deniers. We've seen it with the efforts of major corporations to hire their own scientists to find counter arguments against the scientific evidence about cigarettes, about burning fossil fuels, about oil and gas, about coal, all of it. We've seen the amounts of money spent by industrial giants to raise questions about the validity of the scientific method, the validity of research, and hard science. And their efforts to paint it as mind control, as propaganda. What the Western world decided long ago was that the only legitimate way to counter propaganda is with hard evidence. The more people choose to deny the power of research, of data, of hard evidence, of science, the more dangerous the world becomes. Because what it means is, my opinion is as good opinion as your opinion, and if I've got the money and I've got the power and I've got the military might, I can impose mine on you. It doesn't work that way. And somehow we're going to have to find our way back to the point that it works. Once again. So back to the issue at hand. The foreign policy issues, A, of China, B, of the Russian hacking. One of the, well, we can go a couple of different ways here. Let me perhaps try this direction first, because I don't know which one is going to be most effective, so we'll just kind of take a guess here. The one China policy. The issue of Taiwan, the so-called one China policy, and Donald Trump's questioning the legitimacy of the one China policy. It seemed to me when a couple of weeks ago, when it was pretty obvious that we really needed to deal with this issue in some depth. The hacking question was there, obviously. There had been questions about hacking because everybody knows hacking goes on all the time. Everybody does it. But now this concentrated focus on Putin and on Russia and the extent to which Donald Trump's nomination of Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State, given Tillerson's relationship with Putin, has suddenly inflated the importance of this hacking issue to the point that clearly it's one of the 2 or 3 major lead stories in the news across the world today. My feeling is that both the Russian situation and the one China situation raise serious questions about the substance of foreign policy. And that really prompts what I believe what we need to do in this area here at the Virtual Center. Because I think it speaks to a subject that many people know about in terms of the current details going on, but not that many people appreciate from the perspective of the past. In other words, where did the one China policy come from? What was its intent? Where did this whole idea of a one China policy come from? What's the basis of this acceptance among major nations of this idea that you can officially pretend that a nation, a people, a government doesn't exist? And if there's general agreement among the world, among the nations of the world, that this nation doesn't exist diplomatically, then it doesn't exist. We did it with Cuba for over half a century during the regime of Fidel Castro. By refusing to recognize Cuba, the Cuban government, the Castro government, we were sending a message to the world that we expected our allies to honor our decision to pretend that Cuba didn't exist as a legitimate government, even though the people of Cuba continually vote in support of that government. Where did this kind of tradition come from? Doesn't it seem archaic? How can you pretend that a government and a significant population of people doesn't exist? That's the one China policy. That was our policy towards Cuba for over half a century. A lot of it was driven by politics, by the people who emigrated to South Florida from Cuba. And the Cuban population, Cuban American population in South Florida, has become a political reality in elections and everything else. You can't win an election in Florida unless you buy into this and cater to the priorities of the Cuban American population in South Florida that were driven out of Cuba by Castro. We have built our whole political system around this. Candidates have run for office based on this. It's become extremely hard to separate the politics of the situation from the realities of the situation. It's kind of like the Israeli situation, Israel, and the debates over Israel. The strength of the relationship, of the alliance between the United States and Israel is so strong and has gone on for so long that it's become, this pro-Israel idea has become so integral to our foreign policy that to question the legitimacy of it in the minds of many people is heresy. When President Obama talked about opening relations with Cuba, reopening the embassy in Cuba, renewing daily flights to Cuba, making it possible for Americans to visit Cuba, many prominent political people, especially those on the right, took issue with this, and it's become a major political issue between Republicans and Democrats. It's one of the bases for Republican opposition to the Obama administration, because he is questioning a decision made years ago by prominent people. We can remember, I think we can remember, in the 2012 presidential election, Mitt Romney, the election where Mitt Romney was the Republican candidate, that before the Republican convention that nominated Mitt Romney, you may remember that Sheldon Adelson, the casino owner in Las Vegas, invited the prominent Republican candidates for president to his casino and interviewed them one by one. And his major foreign policy issue was Israel. He wanted to be sure before he supported, and of course we're talking a lot of money, political support, before he supported a candidate, he wanted to know absolutely what their position was on the two-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli issue. He wanted to make sure that the candidate he supported did not consider the building of settlements by the Israeli government in territory that Palestinians claim was invalid or illegal. He basically demanded that the candidate he supports endorse the idea that this is and always has been Israeli territory, that only the Israeli claim is valid, the Palestinian one is not. And the idea that the only sensible solution to the situation there would be a two-state solution where the two states exist independently and are forced by the rest of the world to accept one, the legitimacy of the other, is not a policy that Sheldon Adelson was willing to support. And you may remember, I think it was Newt Gingrich, who apparently made a slip in one of his speeches in Las Vegas and referred to the territory as occupied territory, the implication being that Israel was occupying territory that wasn't its property. And you may remember that Adelson called Gingrich up to his suite and basically said, if you're going to get any support and any money from me, you're going to have to clarify that Israeli policy. And then Gingrich made a speech in which he basically said that he had misspoken. And then he clarified his position so that it was quite consistent with Adelson's position. That's how powerful and that's how important the interests are on these particular issues. It seems to me that one of the reasons why we really need to spend some time on this issue is because there is in this country, I believe, a declining awareness of the priorities and the history of American foreign policy. I don't believe, and we're getting close to the top of the hour. We've got about 5 minutes left before we stop and take our break. So this is a good topic to address just prior to the break, and then when we take our break, we can come back and go on. But I think this is very important, and I haven't heard anybody address it anywhere. But I think it's critical. Part of what's happening with America's general understanding about foreign policy is fallout from, I believe, from the Vietnam War. One of the results or the reactions that has occurred after the Vietnam War and the controversy surrounding it was that major colleges and universities began to back off on requiring or making available professorial level positions in American foreign policy. Throughout most of the 20th century, every notable, reputable history department had at least one foreign policy expert, one historian who was schooled in the history of American foreign policy, at least one. And history majors could focus on foreign policy as a concentration for their degree. The fact of the matter is that when the opposition to the Vietnam War began to gain steam in this country in the 60s and early into the 70s, it was, for the most part, foreign policy representatives from the campuses that drove the opposition to Vietnam. Many prominent American diplomatic historians were laying out a view, a leftist view of American foreign policy, which students, college students and graduate students, to a large extent hadn't been exposed to before. In effect, they were instrumental in radicalizing the campuses. The result was the demonstrations against the Vietnam War. And after that passed, one of the things that became very clear is that many universities were reluctant to continue offering foreign policy as a specialization for study. And what was happening, and it was happening piecemeal, but it was happening. As senior professors began to retire, if they were foreign policy positions, more and more they weren't replaced. Departments were hiring professors, yes, but not in foreign policy. It seems like, and I don't know that anybody's ever done any research on this, but it seems like there was almost an unspoken acceptance of the fact that too many young people in America knew too much about American foreign policy, and that's really what spurred the Vietnam era. And therefore, we don't want our institution, our alumni, our givers, our big givers, don't want their alma mater involved in this kind of anti-American behavior and demonstrations. And so consequently, foreign policy specializations in history departments throughout the country began to disappear. Now, this is not universal. For example, when we had our history grant, Jeremy Surrey, one of the most noted contemporary historians in American foreign policy that exists today, is at the University of Texas in Austin. His specialization is nation building. And he basically has focused his research on the extent to which American foreign policy was driven and defined by nation building, creating governments, cultures, and systems to mirror our own. Explained this way: the more of the world there is that agrees with what we think and believe, the less likely there's going to be any kind of international disturbance. The more the world thinks the same way, the less chance there is for conflict. To Jeremy Surrey, that seemed best to define the priorities of American foreign policy throughout a large part of its history. The One China policy is a product of that thinking. And so when Donald Trump questions its legitimacy and basically promises that when he becomes president, he's going to look seriously at it. He's going to look seriously at NATO. He's going to question the legitimacy of NATO, the legitimacy of the One China policy, because his priority is to pursue a policy of America first. And to him, what that means is you look at every situation independently. If it benefits us, we'll do it. If it doesn't, we won't. So in effect, what he's promising to do is unravel the basic tenets, the premises, which have really defined the world since the 20th century. The whole idea of globalism and free trade, these international trade agreements, all of this is built upon the basic assumptions on which American foreign policy was built almost from the very beginning. And Donald Trump is questioning much of the foundations of that system, of the acceptance of that system. It's very, very important that we understand and appreciate this. Again, to question it and to question Donald Trump is not necessarily to challenge the validity of this system or to challenge him. One of the things it seems to me we're going to have to address is the reality that maybe some of the things that Donald Trump is saying might need to be said. Because much of this has become so generally accepted that it's not taught anymore, it's not discussed anymore, it's just believed. And the fact of the matter is, as we look at some of the issues that are inflaming the world, it could be that some of these things we've stopped talking about, we've stopped questioning, may need to be changed. And it could be that Donald Trump is raising many of those issues. And that may not be bad. Although I don't think for a second that he's that deep. He's pretty shrewd. But I don't know if he's that shrewd. But these are some of the issues, it seems to me, that we need to pursue. We've gone a little bit beyond the top of the hour, so let's pause and take our 5-minute break. Then we'll come back and we'll really get into this. We'll begin with the China situation and look at the One China policy and look at the Taiwan situation. Then we'll move into the Russian hacking situation and the relationships between Trump and Putin. And then I want to introduce you to some of the scholarship surrounding this particular issue. I think this is very important stuff. I hope you'll agree. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We're going to pause for a short 5-minute break, and then we'll be back for our second hour. I hope that you'll stay with us. Thank you. Thank you, Agnes, and I understand we're going to have Horst on with us in a moment. So let me, first of all, quickly give you the phone numbers and the other stuff, and then we'll turn right to Horst. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate with us that way, waobrien906@gmail.com. And to get to our Facebook page, just go to Facebook to the search box and type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will basically have access to our Facebook page. Agnes tells us that we have Horst on the line, so let's go. How are you?
I'm here. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You sound great.
Oh, terrific.
Hey, listen, I kind of thought the minute I mentioned Taiwan.
Well, yeah. It was kind of hard to sit on the sidelines today.
I'll bet you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm not quite the expert on Taiwan that I ought to be, given that I've lived here for over 15 years now. Maybe part of the reason for that is my original flight was scheduled to come here on September 13th, 2001, and as a result of the September 11th attacks, it got delayed, and for a couple of weeks, and so I didn't actually get here until about the 27th, or actually, well, losing the time zone and all that, the 29th. But that whole period is completely burned into my permanent memory from here until forever.
Oh, see, this is information we didn't know about. So this is great.
Yeah, this doesn't come up very often. But as a result of that, I think I've always been somewhat, abnormally fascinated. I mean, I was getting to be a political junkie at the time in U.S. politics anyway, but that whole period, just coming over at the time that I did, it was really like, I don't know, like escaping from an exploding planet or something like that is kind of how it felt, like just as soon as I got out, like it seemed like everything just went to pieces. And so watching as an outsider as we started the war in Iraq and then finding out that we did, Abu Ghraib and torture and just, one hit after hit after hit and all the outrages. I think it just had the net effect of really cementing my attention permanently on just all things to do a very U.S. centric outlook on watching the news and stuff. And as a result, I never really got into the local political scene as much as I might have otherwise had things been more normal, at the time I come over. Right. So, but as it is, I have been here, like I said, for over 15 years, and so I've picked up a couple of things. So I don't know. I thought we might discuss a bit.
Well, I'd like to hear that. Can I ask you a couple of questions about your situation?
Sure.
Okay. When you got there, and when all of this stuff started to happen, when the Iraq War broke out, when this information about Abu Ghraib and all that, was the fact that you were an American, did that have an impact on you as far as your acceptance among the Taiwanese people?
No, by and large, I mean, to this day, Taiwan still just the average Taiwanese person does not really know anything about Donald Trump apart from the fact that he's a guy that has been on television.
Okay.
They are starting to get a sense of it now, but just only a little bit. I mean, as far as like the phone call, for instance, to President Tsai Ing-wen goes, that's still being largely met with optimism, and it's more welcome than anything else at this point. Sure.
So they're not dealing with the fact that the Trump people set that up weeks and weeks ahead. They
might be. They might be. In fact,
there's evidence that the more right wing elements within the Trump team, as it were, like Bolton, for example, wanted to really raise the issue of the one China policy as quickly as they could. And so they basically, it seems like they seem to, fall onto the idea that a congratulatory call from the president of Taiwan might be a way to raise the issue. And of course, when Donald Trump said, "She called me," and so we don't know, but apparently the
people. That was Trump, making his typical claim, well, I can't release my tax reform, my tax returns because the IRS is auditing. No, he's just doing that. He's playing to his base. No, it was highly orchestrated. It was set up as we all understand now for weeks in advance. Right. And as far as it goes, as a piece of political maneuvering, foreign policy maneuvering, it doesn't, as in itself, it might not have been a bad thing. It's just, it's like saying, you've got a brain tumor that and you need an operation quickly, and we can all agree to the fact you can get second and third opinions that no, this thing really has to come out. But that doesn't mean that you're going to get Chuckles the Clown to perform the surgery for you. I mean, it makes a difference who does these things.
Right.
That's the problem that we're running into.
I got you.
And there are legitimate disagreements, and I follow some very sharp, commentators on the political system here. People that have been here even longer than I have. There's one very, very bright fellow who is a professor in one of the universities in the major city close to me here, who's been running a blog on Taiwanese things for ever since I've been here, and he's very sharp. And he thought that the phone call was actually a very positive thing.
Right.
And as it was orchestrated and the effects, like putting Taiwan kind of on the map and the whole, even calling the one China policy into question, it in itself does not have to be, the end of the world. I mean,
right.
We have gotten arguably pretty complacent, in our stance toward China and their role in this region, in the South China Sea and areas like that. There's a whole lot of problems. Territorial disputes that involve not just Taiwan and China, but also Korea and Japan and all kinds of stuff like that. And China's been very aggressive in the last few years, like building military bases and things like that on tiny little islands in the South China Sea to expand their hegemony here. And those are, and Obama, he's a very cautious kind of a player. He's largely backed off from what it looks like from here. So it might. I could see an argument that it's time to push back a little bit harder, and if the incoming administration wants to do that, the perfect time to set up like a phone call thing like that is before Trump actually is officially sworn in as the president. Like they say, this is the time to do it.
Yeah.
So far so good.
If he was the one that initiated the whole thing,
oh no,
it would cause a blow up.
It would never occur to him anyway.
By setting it up this way, the phone call raised the issue. So now there's nothing wrong with looking at the whole thing, looking at the whole, at the whole situation, and reopening the one China policy after, I think, as I think I read in one place, this has been in play since the Carter administration. Yeah, that this was the decision, and China pretty much insisted that we diplomatically operate on the assumption that there's only one China, and they're it, and that Taiwan, we believe, belongs to China, is part of China, and so therefore we don't want you dealing with Taiwan as if it was an independent, separate entity, and beginning with Carter, we kind of agreed to do that. We just kind of pretend that there's one China and all of the, and that meant that China didn't have to become, China could back off and say, as long as nobody's making an issue of it, we don't have to. At the same time, we continue to do business in Taiwan. We could, it's a major trading partner. But we don't officially recognize it in diplomatic terms.
Well, that's kind of the basic understanding, but at the same time, there's a couple of common misconceptions mixed up in that.
Okay.
One is that apparently the U.S. has never really formally adopted the stance that Taiwan is a part of China. We have got, as a matter of policy, we have come out in support of the one China what do you call it? Not a policy, but like that statement, that ethos. Right. But at the same time, we have not formally, accepted the idea that Taiwan is not, in fact, an independent nation. It's just that we are not doing the opposite either.
Right.
I believe, if I understand right, our particular position can be more or less summed up as that we are staying out of it. We're leaving it to between Taiwan and China to sort that out for themselves.
Right.
And we're not officially taking a stance, but at the same time, we are offering our support to Taiwan should they need help in asserting, their rights against anything that looks like an oppressive
right
or an attack from China. And as a matter of fact, we are, I believe, Taiwan's number 2 trading partner, and probably no small part of that is the fact that we supply them with weapons.
Yeah.
However, at the same time, we also supply Taiwan with largely obsolescent weapons at jacked up prices that we couldn't get for them anywhere else in the world either. Like for instance, we sell the good stuff to Saudi Arabia. We don't we don't sell that stuff to Taiwan.
Yeah.
Although at the same time, Taiwan also has like they buy all kinds of stuff from us, including like Navy ships and stuff like that, and aircraft that go with that, and ordnance and all kinds of things. But for instance, there was a deal that we were considering selling F-16s to Taiwan within the last year or two, and decided not to. Now the F-16 is a 40-year-old plane. I mean, if we're not willing to share that with them, then the interesting thing is that apparently China is also not yet militarily equipped to actually pull off a successful invasion of Taiwan either, which is something I only just found out like in the last couple of days. I assumed that it would be a done deal if they wanted to do that.
See, I always assumed that too.
Well, largely because of artillery and missiles and things like that. But it would do China very little good to actually, they could do that if they wanted like a scorched earth thing, but that would accomplish nothing.
No, exactly.
They would destroy what they wanted to take, and they would also. I mean, if it's possible to inflame the entire world opinion against you, that would surely do it. I would imagine. Yeah. Although at the same time,
let me ask you: is the things that you've said about selling them outdated military equipment at inflated prices? Is this generally believed in Taiwan? Do people in Taiwan believe that they're being taken advantage of in trade relations with the United States?
I don't get that impression. I just when I say that's my own value judgment based on what I hear from what's being passed on to me. I don't know if the average Taiwanese person in the street has a sense one way or the other about these things. For the most part, Americans are very popular here. When I came over in the beginning, nobody really even understood anything about the war in Afghanistan and later the war in Iraq, but their official policy was we support America in the war against terror. And I went to a couple of schools, in the beginning here, and in a public kind of Q&A thing, a couple of students asked me like what I thought about Osama bin Laden and stuff like that. It's like, we're talking about like grade schoolers here, but yeah, there's a very rudimentary understanding that we're the good guys, and like at that time that was our enemy, and so they were the bad guys, and so there's a sense of solidarity there, and so far, even as it goes, like I don't think that anybody really has a sense that Trump is a bad guy or even there's anything particularly off about that yet. I don't know. I mean, like the last week or so, what comes back to me in terms of feedback from the local politics is still very, very slow. It's very sluggish. Because I can't monitor the media in real time. I have to wait for secondary things to come back to me. My Chinese is just not good enough to do it.
If you had any idea how valuable this information is to the context of this whole conversation, I mean, I don't know this, and I'm sure a lot of the people listening don't know it either. I mean,
I don't know it either. I can't stand by. I'm not an authority. I mean, like this is my.
No, but you're there.
Right. Well,
you're there, and you're intelligent enough to have opinions on these things, and you're basically sharing a perspective which none of us would have any way of getting.
If there's one thing we've learned this year is you don't have to be intelligent to have opinions.
Oh, I know, but you happen to be, and
I appreciate that.
But the point is that you're on the ground there. I mean, I go crazy when I watch NBC News when they put Richard Engel on. I go because he's there. I mean, he gives you a perspective of some of these places that you can't get anywhere else because he's there and he's talking to people and it's just there's nothing like it, and that's what you're providing here. I mean, this is just amazing. So I think it's great.
Yeah, well, no, that's why I thought it might be worthwhile to call in and talk with you a little bit about it. I was going to say to bring it back to the earlier point about the actual phone call in itself might have been a pretty justifiable and positive, kind of maneuver. I mean, because like I said, like and a lot of observers, a lot of people here, a lot of people in the Taiwanese government have really felt like the U.S. has not been supportive enough, and Taiwan's industry and economy has been slowly sucked into China, and a lot of the U.S. trade policies make that happen, make that possible. We have really not stood up for the Taiwanese very much. I mean, we're kind of like that big brother that, if you cross this line, okay, we might have to have a couple of talks. But, as long as we have our own lucrative trade deals, and we can look at the other way around and other things, or we'd just rather, stay out and let you guys handle it by yourselves.
Right.
So, okay, as far as that goes, it could be defensible. What really mucks it up is when Donald Trump follows up in the next 24 to 48 hours, and then, like, for the week after that, launching his own personal Twitter war against China.
Right.
Which is just infantile.
Yeah.
I mean, that takes whatever gains could have been gained from this highly orchestrated, and well thought out political maneuver, and he just goes and just like kicks sand all over the whole thing. And just, I mean, that ruined whatever positive effect could have been pulled out of it.
Right.
Just destroyed it.
When he basically made the suggestion that before he would commit to the idea of one China, it would have to become some sort of part of some sort of a trade deal with China, that if it benefited us, economically, to continue to support the idea of one China, then we would do it.
Well, that's the thing. It's like that wasn't even the first thing he did. That was like the third or fourth thing he did. The first couple of things it was just these really childish remarks about how, China didn't ask our opinion when they started inflating their currency and all this stuff.
Right.
How unfair, how terrible. No,
he basically attacked everything that China's been doing, which seems to be against our interest. In other words, he leveled both guns against them and put them up against the wall, it seems to me.
There's that, and one or two of his claims are a little bit specious. I mean, like you could argue about whether that's legitimate or not. But what the point that you raised specifically is that at the same time, like in that particular series of interviews and other things he did, he's kind of signaled a willingness to make Taiwan a bargaining chip.
Exactly.
Which again, it's like, okay, at that point, like, terrific. Taiwan has always kind of been not exactly an Israel kind of a situation, but it's like a quasi, outpost of democracy in the, side of the
in the China Sea. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it's never been quite as overt as like what we have with Israel and the Middle East, but not by a long shot. Although, from what I understand, like there's an interesting point in history back in the 70s when things could have gone a different way. Mm-hmm. Taiwan almost went nuclear at one point, supposedly. Didn't get there. Taiwan also had the option to be recognized in the UN, but they were not. If I understand it correctly, at the time, it was Chiang Kai-shek at that time, and he had the option to remain recognized in the UN, but they couldn't have a seat on the Security Council, and he just went all in and said, no, it's either all or nothing, and they got nothing, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
From my understanding, that's more or less how it went, and that really sealed the deal.
Right.
So, yeah, the history is a little convoluted.
You raise an issue that that I hadn't thought of for a long time, and it deals with Israel, with the Israeli situation. In the 60s and 70s, part of the new left, so to speak, which was raising questions about American foreign policy and the fact that we were being driven primarily by financial interests to exploit the world and those kinds of things. When it came to Israel, the basic thesis coming out of this particular new left ideology was that the major purpose for us supporting and building up Israel in that region was to cause it to be the brunt of Middle Eastern hatred. That as long, the fact that you have this island of luxury living and high rises and all of these other things that are going on in Israel, that we had a major part in helping them produce. basically meant that you were setting Israel up almost to be the brunt of all the hatred and all the envy that existed within the Arab world. And that as long as you were able to do that, then the Arab world couldn't really unify. That Israel, the existence of Israel, made it impossible for the Arab world to unify. And that was exactly what we wanted, because our access to oil demanded that the Middle East source for oil never be able to unify, because if they did, they would be able to hold us hostage. And so therefore we were using Israel as a bargain, like you say, as a weapon, as a chip. And a lot of leftists believe that the reason that we supported Israel so strongly was in order to prevent the Middle East, the Arabs of the Middle East, from coming together, putting aside the things that divided them, and becoming united in terms of their control of the oil, of the flow of oil in the world, and all the rest of it. And a number of people believe that, but now it's some of the things you're saying suggest that there are people in Taiwan who kind of look at the way that we have dealt with Taiwan the same way.
Oh, I don't know about some people, just me, really. But
well, no, but this whole idea, I mean, I've been reading about this bargaining chip idea. I mean, the way Donald Trump has phrased this, the Taiwanese couldn't think of anything else but that that he was seeing them as a possible chip. That, in other words, if one China suits us, fine. If not, then we'll abandon it and we'll let Taiwan take off. And then, of course, China responds by saying, well, if there's nothing to be gained by being peaceful, then we'll just go set about taking back Taiwan, which he should have been doing anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. As far as Trump goes, I mean, like I would suspect strongly that 3 or 4 months prior to now, if you'd asked him about Taiwan, he would have, like half of my cousins, assumed it was Thailand and wouldn't be able to point out either one to you on the map. I don't think he understands anything about this area. I don't think he knows this region. I don't think he cares. I mean, unless what we're finding out is his mission really seems to be personal enrichment in some way or another. That he does have apparently his businesses are looking at trying to build a hotel and an expanding area up in the north here, and who knows about that. The analogy with Israel is very tenuous. I mean, I just mentioned that as a point. It's you could say the same thing about Cuba, like a Soviet outpost on on the shores of America, just to be there, just as a reminder of
90 miles from Florida and all that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Israel's a special situation. There's never been anything like that in history as far as that goes. I mean, yes, it is there, and it has played a part, I'm sure, to destabilize or not destabilize, or just to kind of prevent the prospect or weaken the prospect of Arab unification. But the thing is, Arab unification was not, had never happened prior to that either. This goes back to the Balfour days and before that. So I mean, like it's not like that. Yeah.
But, there's been an undercurrent throughout the Middle East for a century of this the idea of a united Arab world of one common interest among all Middle Easterners, among them, in other words, the Muslim world, the focus of the Muslim world.
Well, you have to go back prior to the Mongol invasions, before, when they came and smashed the caliphate, basically, like, you did have an organized and a unified and highly advanced and enlightened Arabic civilization prior to that. But, what was it? I can't remember exactly which one. One of Genghis Khan's grandsons, Udakai, or the other one. One of them came in there and absolutely demolished, I guess it was Baghdad. I don't know.
I think it was.
And just that entire region has never been the same. Has never recovered. Has never even come back. Has always been a pale shadow, and these days are even worse off than that. Yeah, at one time, the Arabic world led the world in academia. And
academia, intelligence, science, research, everything. Oh yeah. one of the issues you've raised, and I don't know that you did intentionally, but you did, is this tendency, and I've got it. I mean, I got to admit that I'm guilty of this of this too. There seems to be an inclination to attribute more depth to Donald Trump. Those people that are trying to defend him, or to basically say, hold off, let's give the guy a chance, then the next thing you do is you begin to allege that there's more depth and more substance to him than there may be. And that's really the question, a question that you raise. You know, Chuckles the Clown analogy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's kind of extreme, but you know, for example, one of the things that I wanted to get to, and I will get to it in a later program, but there's a historian, a fellow that retired. He's an emeritus professor at Princeton University and NYU, named Stephen F. Cohen. He's an editor of The Nation magazine.
Oh, all right.
And he's been on a few talk shows. He was on it this morning again. This is the third time I've seen him. He's a Russian expert. And basically, he's got a very, very positive view of the kinds of things that Trump is saying and doing when it comes to Russia. And what he's basically saying is that we are allowing ourselves to fall into a Cold War trap of creating a Cold War situation again that would actually even be worse than the first one, and we don't want to do it. And what he's saying is it's almost like an anti-McCarthy, that in other words, people, Democrats, leftists, liberals, are inclined more and more and more to look at Trump the way that Democrats looked at McCarthy in the 1950s and 60s. And the media is going along with it. And so rather than having a debate or a discussion about the best policy that we ought to have with Putin and with Russia, instead what's happening is we're being swept into this hysteria, which is the same kind of hysteria that led to the Cold War in the 1950s and 60s. But again, the problem that I see with that is, in order to buy into him, you got to basically believe that there's more depth to Donald Trump than I believe there really is. You know, I don't like he was this morning. He kept making the statement that Donald Trump wants to revisit this danger of a new Cold War. He wants to establish positive relationships with Russia right now, so that we won't allow ourselves to sink into a Cold War mentality which would threaten the world. And the first thing I thought of when he said that is that this is the kind of question or perspective that the nation has traditionally brought to some of these major foreign policy issues. That's why so many people see The Nation as being a radical publication, because it raises questions and comes at things differently than anybody else does. And Cohen's doing it. And it's very, very interesting. And because I've been collecting, more and more evidence that there seems to be a question, becoming very serious one, about whether in fact Donald Trump is being manipulated and controlled by Putin and by the Russians. It's not just a question of him wanting good relations with them. It's the fact that they've got some leverage over him which we don't know about.
Yeah.
And that's why he won't release his tax returns and things, because he doesn't want people to know the depth of the business relationships that he has with Russia. But in fact, they might have something over him which would compromise his ability to conduct foreign policy in the best interests of this country. And the thing that got me really looking at this is one of the people that that I've heard this from is David Ignatius in the Washington Post. David Ignatius is one of the most reputable international columnists that there is. I mean, he is considered by both left and right to be, just among the best and the most accomplished and the most knowledgeable. And he's raising questions. He's not saying that there is evidence that the Russians have some leverage over Donald Trump. But what he is saying is we've got to basically create the kind of nonpartisan, independent investigation to make sure that they don't have any kind of leverage over Donald Trump. And his position is this doesn't threaten Trump. It actually promises to liberate him because more and more people are beginning to believe that there's something hidden, something going on here that we don't know about. And Ignatius feels that the only way that he can get rid of that is to open everything up and make clear exactly what his business relationships with Russia have been and are. And then once the question of Russian leverage was eliminated, then we could get into a positive discussion and deliberation about how our relationships with Russia need to be conducted now. Maybe the continuing to conduct them on the assumptions that drove the Cold War is no longer the way to go. I mean, Cohen raises the issue of NATO, for example. And he said the fact of the matter is what we've done is, NATO, he defines NATO as an organization in search of a mission. The Cold War is over, but NATO still exists. And the purpose of NATO was to contain Soviet communism. So in effect, as Cohen says, to admit all of these former satellite countries like the Baltic countries as members of NATO is to push NATO right up against the border of Russia. And so basically the message it sends to Russia is, as far as we're concerned, the Cold War is still going on. We're going to do everything we can do to contain you and lock you in and all of this other stuff. And his position is that under those circumstances, from the perspective of Russia looking out, the things that Putin is doing are the things that Russia needs to do in order to claim its legitimate place as one of the great nations of the world. Now, the question is, do you really think that Donald Trump understands that? I don't.
No, I don't.
But in order to buy into him, you almost have, in order to buy into that, you almost have to accept that there's more to Trump than I believe there really is. So consequently, I don't know what's going on, but my God, is it fascinating.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Bill, if you remember, we had a discussion about Donald Trump maybe 6, 7, 8 months ago. I don't even remember now. It seems like it was a lifetime ago. But I mentioned to you way back when that if it was even likely that Trump really actually turned out to even want the job of the presidency, that he was going to approach it. He wanted to be a Zaphod Beeblebrox character. Yeah. A figurehead, and let other people take over the actual running of the government. And and then what do we hear? Like just as he was about to clinch the nomination, that John Kasich's people came back and said that they had been approached by one of Trump's sons, saying, "Hey, look, you know what? If you'll be our vice president, we'll let you run everything." Right. He doesn't want to do it. Right. And that was, to me, is kind of like a partial confirmation of or anecdotal confirmation. And then now we see that Trump doesn't want to attend the presidential security briefings. He's going to let Pence go. Pence is doing it, right? Yeah, Pence is doing it. It looks very much like this situation. Trump really does not have. I mean, what do you even call it? It's a combination of factors: the mentality, the character, the attention span. Attention span, yeah, exactly. Yeah. He to even care. I keep coming back to the words that his biographer used. I forgot the gentleman's name. The guy that wrote, he was his ghostwriter for The Art of the Deal. For The Art of the Deal, yeah. Who spent like a year with him, and he would say, like, he would sit down and ask him simple questions about his childhood, like asking him like biographical things, and Trump couldn't answer, and would start fidgeting, and would get really impatient, and after, like, in less than 10 to 15 minutes, would just get almost to a point of throwing a fit.
Yeah.
And it was just it was going nowhere for like 2 or 3 months. I look at that, and that's one person's anecdotal evidence, but it's pretty convincing when you put it up against the idea that here's a guy who can't sit through a 20-minute security briefing every day.
Right.
He's supposed to be the president, and just all the things that keep coming back to us. No, I don't think this is the guy that has the acumen for any kind of policy, guidance or anything like that. I think he's going to be a rubber stamp for whoever is the loudest and most persuasive voice. To some extent, we saw this with George W. Bush. It's just that the loudest, most persuasive voice in his ear most of the time was Dick Cheney, who was right there, the whole time. So it was more or less we still had some kind of stability. With Trump, we don't really know. We got all kinds of weird players,
right?
That are. I mean,
well, not
Steve
only
Bannon, Mike.
Yeah, Steve Bannon and people like Tillerson and some of these. I mean, some of these.
Tillerson, Mike Flynn. I mean, if you look at if you scratch any one of these individual people, they are all by themselves a potential disaster.
Right.
And what we have is we don't have a single non-disaster anywhere in the entire cabinet. I'm not sure if there's a ray of sunshine anywhere to be found so far.
Well, there's no diplomacy in it. There's no sense of diplomacy in any one of them. There's strongly opinionated people who are used to having power and getting their way.
Yeah.
And the question is, I mean, we know that Donald Trump is that way, but he's put a lot of people in his cabinet, or wants to, that that think the same way. And the question is, how is that going to play on the world stage?
Right.
And to suggest that he represents rethinking and rediscussing many of the assumptions in international affairs that we've bought into for the last 100 years is great, but it implies that there's more to him than there's any evidence that there really is.
It has nothing to do with him, and I think a lot of this is somewhat haphazard. I mean, we discussed also a few weeks ago whether I don't know, I can't exactly remember how the subject came up, but we were talking about the rise of racist attacks and all kinds of like domestic violence and things like that. And it was my opinion at the time that I don't think a lot of people say like, well, this is a level of racism that America has always harbored. I think something actually went on steroids after the word came out that Trump was going to be the president. Yeah. I think we actually we turned a fork in the road. We could have gone the other way, but we've gone somewhere new. Yeah, we're in some territory that did not have to happen, and we were not on that course before. We actually changed course. And Trump is like the figurehead on the prow of the boat, but he's not the person in charge. That boat just moved. Yeah. And where we're going now is also got foreign policy implications.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to figure out where it's going to go at this point. But Trump's not in charge of that. And the question at this point is, who is in charge?
Right.
Because there doesn't seem to be a single guiding principle behind it. These names just keep popping up.
Right.
And in fact, like if you look at at some of the deliberations behind the scenes, like for instance, you've got Trump's son-in-law, like Ivanka's husband or something like that, has got Kushner. Some kind of. Yeah, right. He's Eric got some kind of grudge against Chris Christie, but Christie's still in there too, and so that's causing tensions. And then you have you've got Flynn. Flynn comes into a national security meeting and he tells everybody, and he's causing waves that nobody can talk about anything. And he's got his own little particular cult of personality. And he put Ben Carson. What's he doing over there?
I agree.
All these people are these. There's not a single guiding ethos behind any of this. It's just all these disparate characters that have nothing to do with each other. It's like the very opposite. You could take this back to Woodrow Wilson and his revolution of government as guided by professional bureaucrats, and we are undoing that. Yeah. We're going back there, and that to me is like it's a full frontal assault on the. This is like Ronald Reagan's dream.
Right. Well, it's an assault on the world order that Wilson and those people that came after him sought to create. Yeah. That's what it is. And that That's what the one China idea seems to reflect, is that view of the world. And Trump's behavior is challenging all of this. I mean, all of these things that we've always believed are now up for grabs and open. I don't know that he's consciously doing it. I think he's doing it because he doesn't know better.
No. Well, that's the thing. It's like I said, like the phone call could have been one thing, but he goes on Twitter and it automatically proves to the entire world that he has no clue as to the implications of anything he's done. He's in some kind of particular little ego war with a country, that he knows nothing about.
Right.
And geez, if you told me that Trump couldn't pick China out on a map, I don't think I'd be 100% surprised. You know what I mean? Just
all of these things that he accused China of. I mean, all of it is designed to break apart everything that exists, everything that's created and kept the world at peace since World War II.
I could see two sides of that. Now, on the one hand, I could see like our one China policy previously as representing a pursuit of stable, foreign policy.
Right.
And on the other hand, I could also see an argument that there's a bit too much complacency, and we are actually giving a bit too much away to China, by not interceding more forcefully on Taiwan's behalf.
Right.
That's really hard to argue against. I mean, I've been here. My wife was a friend of hers from school started a factory. He started his own company, and their first factory was here in Taiwan, and they started to expand. So they built a new factory, and they got a deal in China in Fujian province, and they got certain tax breaks, and they got certain kind of deals to incentives to have them build it there.
Right.
And they moved in there and they operated for about 5 years, and then like that little lease came up, and the Chinese government came back and said, okay, well, you know what? If you want the same kind of breaks that you've been enjoying so far, you're going to have to relocate your factory deeper into the interior. Your tax break here is no longer valid. And you're going to have to come in, and and that's kind of how it goes. Like China has been very slowly assimilating Taiwanese. I mean, in America, we think about our manufacturing base, relocating to China. Same thing has happened in Taiwan too. I personally worked in a factory that. No, this is inside baseball. Bob, our friend Bob Kincaid is a big fan of a writer named Joe Bagent, who had written a book, Deer Hunting with Jesus, and part of it had referenced a point that a Rubbermaid factory that used to be in West Virginia had largely relocated to Taiwan, and that was back like 12 years ago. I worked at one of those factories because I saw some of the designs that were there. They were for Rubbermaid trash cans or something like that. Well, all of that stuff, by the time I got to that factory, had already moved back over to China, and it's just weird. I'm sorry, I can't explain that in enough detail to make it make sense. But like it's just weird. Like I felt like a part of history, but connecting like West Virginia and Taiwan and China at that moment. This is about 5 years ago.
Right.
But anyway, the point is that is how the same relocation, the manufacturing base that America has been experiencing going to China. Taiwan has done the same thing. When I was growing up in the 70s in America, the tag was made in Japan, and everyone says, oh, that's where the cheap stuff comes from. Right. Then about 1980, 1981, it became made in Taiwan. Yeah. And by the time I moved to Taiwan, it was already made in China. Right. And it there's always been that manufacturing base shifting further and further over that way. We talk about Foxconn, the company the factory where people jump off the roof and that manufactured Apple. Very few people realize that that's actually a Taiwanese company. The factory's located in China, but the owner of that company is a Taiwanese guy. He's the richest man here. And that's part of it. That company used to be located in Taiwan years and years ago.
Now it's there.
But yeah, and it has been for a long time, and they're the biggest player in town.
One of the interesting asides, the thing you mentioned about it was made in Japan, then made in Taiwan, then made in China. The interesting thing is that when made in Japan was the issue, everybody talked about how cheap the stuff was. Then when it shifted to Taiwan, people began to see quality in the Japanese stuff. I mean, the Japanese cars were better than the American-made cars, and they questioned Kias and Hyundais and that kind of stuff. Now Kias and Hyundais are legitimate as quality things because now the Chinese are making, and the cheap stuff is over there.
Well, so Kia Hyundai is Korea, but yeah.
Yeah, Korea. That's right. I'm sorry, it wasn't Taiwan.
Yeah, South Korea. Well, Samsung is the big Korean winner there. That's a different situation, but it is kind of related. Because those companies have factories in China too. Yeah.
Horst, this is fascinating stuff. I mean, the perspective that you're able to bring. I mean, God Almighty, this is great. What you've provided is fabulous. Because what I wanted
in 15 years, you pick up this and that.
Well, what I wanted to do is just go through the basic idea of what America's foreign policy priorities were early on, and where this idea of Pax Americana came from. This idea of remaking the world in our own image, and the assumption is, like at Versailles, and then again at Yalta with FDR, that you had to find a way to bring Russia into it. Everybody had to play the same game at the same time with the same rules if this was going to work. And it gave tremendous advantages to the Russians with the structure of the UN. The same thing has occurred with China. It's, we felt so strongly the need to include China in the major decisions in the world that it gave them an advantage that probably they didn't necessarily deserve. And all of these things now are being opened up for investigation. And I don't know whether the quality of the people doing the investigating is going to work.
No,
I really don't. I really don't.
The quality of our mainstream media. I mean, I don't think.
No, they don't. They're operating out of a mentality.
If the freedom of American democracy rests in their hands, I'm afraid we're sunk. The
media is operating out of the playbook from 40, 50 years ago. I mean, they're talking about Russia. They're talking about Russia as if it was still Soviet Union, And of course, Putin's the key. He's the linchpin there. Yeah. And
as far as the Chinese thing, I have a theory. I would imagine. I mean, last I know, China had something like over 750 million citizens officially classified as peasants. I don't know exactly what peasantry means, like on the global poverty index, but it's pretty damn low. 750 million. That's more than twice the entire United States population.
Right.
The idea of like giving China favored trade nation status was the neoliberal dream.
Yeah.
Expanding markets and raising up a middle class that would be able to buy crap from us. And in the meantime, though, we gave away like our manufacturing base to them, and so suddenly, and we get to a point now where I think America has officially exited the foreign policy realm, or we have signaled to the world that we are no longer to be considered what is officially called a rational player. We're not a rational actor. We're not one of those people. We are now in a bull in a china shop. That's the Trump effect. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but you can expect things to get broken.
Yeah.
And that's the trouble. That means that people are going to start pulling back. Countries are going to start going over. China, comparatively speaking, is an oasis of stability. Human rights violations and this and that. Well, you know what? At least they're not going to break the whole damn place, and that's really what we're looking at now. Oh, jeez, right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You got to get out of here.
Hey, listen, thank you. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. We do have to leave. We're at 59 minutes after the hour, so we've got less than a minute to go. But again, thank you so very much. You've provided a perspective and information that we couldn't get anywhere else. What a tremendous opportunity for all of us. I invite you tomorrow to join us again. Remember, we'll begin 1/2 hour later. We'll start at 1:30 tomorrow in the East. And we'll pick up with this same issue. And I'll try to put a little bit of historical background onto some of this. But with the perspective that Horst has given us today, this is just absolutely stupendous. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Have a wonderful evening, and please make an effort to join us again tomorrow. Thank you.